Clara Whitmore raised the rifle with both hands shaking and pointed it at the only man who hadn't tried to kill her yet. She was 17 years old. Her face was split open. 3 of her own cousins had done it, and they had left her in the dirt of her own barn, certain she wouldn't get back up. They were wrong. If this story already has your heart beating faster, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. Follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1876 did not forgive weakness. It never had. Not in Texas, not on the frontier, not on the 40-acre stretch of dry, stubborn land that Elias Whitmore had spent 23 years breaking his back to hold. But Elias Whitmore was dead now, and so was his wife, Margaret. And the land their daughter Clara had grown up walking barefoot across every morning before sunrise, was being taken. Not by strangers, by family. Clara heard them before she saw them. She always heard things before other people did. Her father used to say it was a gift. Her mother used to say it was a curse. Clara had never decided which one was right. But that morning, lying flat against the hay in the far corner of the barn, her left eye swollen completely shut and her lip crusted over with dried blood, she heard the horses outside stop moving. She heard boots on the dry ground. She heard her cousin Dade's voice, low and mean, the way it always sounded when he'd been drinking since before noon. "Check the barn again," Dade said. "She's dead, Dade." That was Roy, the youngest of the 3, the one who'd looked away when it was happening. "Ain't nobody survives a beating like that." "I said check the barn." Clara pressed herself deeper into the corner. She could feel the old rifle against her leg, her father's rifle, a Winchester she'd been shooting since she was 9 years old. She dragged it across the floor to reach it. It had taken her the better part of an hour, moving slow, trying not to make a sound, while her ribs screamed at her with every breath. She had 1 shot loaded, 1, and 3 men outside. She listened to Roy's boots cross the yard, heard the barn door creak. She held her breath. Roy stepped inside, stood there in the doorway with the Texas sun burning hard behind him, turning him into a dark silhouette. He looked around. He looked at the hay piled high on the left side. He looked at the empty stalls. He did not look hard enough at the corner. "She ain't here," Roy called out. A long pause. "You're sure?" Dade said from outside. "I'm sure." Roy hesitated. "Dade, she was your cousin. She was just a girl. She was standing between us and 40 acres of land with a creek running through it," Dade said flatly. "That makes her an obstacle, not family. You understand me?" Roy didn't answer. "I said, do you understand me?" "Yeah," Roy said quietly. "I understand." He backed out of the barn. The door creaked shut. Clara stayed still for a long time after the hoofbeats faded. She counted her own heartbeats, slow, ragged, painful, until she couldn't hear the horses anymore. Until the only sound left was the wind against the barn walls and the dry creak of the Texas heat settling over everything. Then she let herself breathe. And then she let herself cry. Not long, not much. Clara Whitmore had learned early in life that crying didn't fix a fence or feed a horse or keep wolves away from the sheep pen. She'd learned it from her father, who'd built this ranch with his own hands and his own sweat, and who died of a fever 2 months ago without ever asking anyone for help. She was her father's daughter. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, winced when she touched the split in her lip. She pulled herself upright against the wall, got her feet under her, stood. And she stood there in her father's barn, in the silence of a Texas summer morning, with one bullet in a rifle and 3 cousins who thought she was dead, and she made herself a promise. She was going to keep this land. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to keep it. She didn't hear the horse until it was already through the gate. She'd been working at the water trough, moving slow, every step an exercise in controlled breathing, trying to get enough water into the barn to last her through the day without having to show herself in the open yard. She heard the hoofbeats and flattened herself against the inside wall, rifle up, heart slamming. The horse that came through the gate was a dark bay, and it was limping badly, favoring its left foreleg, moving with the slow, careful gait of an animal that had been pushed too hard for too long and had nothing left to give. The man on its back wasn't in much better shape. He was big, broad through the shoulders, long in the leg, but he was slumped forward over the saddle horn in a way that said he wasn't riding so much as he was hanging on. His coat was torn open at the left sleeve. Dark stains spread out from the tear. His hat was pulled low, and his jaw was set like he was concentrating very hard on one specific thing, which appeared to be staying upright. He made it to the center of the yard. Then the horse stopped moving entirely, and the man slid sideways out of the saddle and hit the dirt. Clara watched through a crack in the barn wall. The man lay in the dust for a moment. Then he put one hand flat on the ground and pushed himself up to one knee. He stayed there a second, breathing. Then he got to his feet, stood swaying. He was looking at the barn. Clara raised the rifle. The man took 2 steps toward the barn door, and she shoved it open before he could reach it, coming out into the glare with the Winchester leveled at the center of his chest. He stopped. He looked at her. Or rather, he looked at the rifle first, and then at her face, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but something quieter than that. Something that looked like recognition of a situation he'd been in before. "Tell me why I shouldn't shoot you," Clara said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. She was grateful for that. The man looked at her for a long moment. His face was weathered and hard, the kind of face that had been outside in every kind of weather for years, and had the lines to prove it. He had dark eyes, and they were clear, despite everything else about him suggesting he was about to fall down again. There was blood soaking through his sleeve and dripping off his fingers, and he didn't seem to be paying it any attention at all. "Because," he said. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used much recently. "If you shoot me, you'll be the only living thing on this property." He paused. "How's that working out for you so far?" Clara didn't lower the rifle. "You're bleeding on my father's land," she said. "I noticed that." He glanced down at his arm. "Took a bullet 2 days back." Kept moving. He looked back up at her. "I'm not here to cause trouble, miss. My horse is done. I need water and a place to stop. That's all." "This is private property." "Yes, ma'am. I can see that." "My cousins just left." She watched his face when she said it, watched for any flicker of recognition. "They'll be back." "Is that what happened to you?" he said quietly. Clara's jaw tightened. "Don't. I'm not asking to be polite. I'm asking because it matters for what happens next." He kept his eyes on hers. "If you've got people coming back here with bad intentions, 1 rifle and 1 bullet, and I'm guessing it's 1, because if you had more, you'd feel steadier holding that thing, is not going to be enough." A long silence stretched between them. Clara hadn't lowered the rifle, but she hadn't fired it either. "What's your name?" she said finally. "Ethan Cole." "Where are you coming from?" "North. Before that, doesn't matter." "Where are you going?" He looked at her steadily. "Right now? Nowhere. My horse needs rest or she's going to go lame. I need to get this bullet wound dealt with before it goes bad." He tilted his head slightly. "And unless I'm reading the situation wrong, you need somebody standing on your side, even if that somebody is currently bleeding in your yard." Clara stared at him. He stared back. "You got a well?" he said. "Around the side of the house." "Can I use it?" She lowered the rifle. Slowly. "Don't make me regret it," she said. "Miss," Ethan Cole said, already moving toward the well, "the list of things I've made people regret is short. Letting me use the well isn't going to make it." She didn't trust him. That needed to be said clearly, because Clara Whitmore was not a foolish girl, and she was not a desperate one. And the fact that she let a strange man water his horse and sit in her barn and strip off his coat to look at the wound in his upper arm did not mean she had decided he was safe. The rifle stayed within reach. She watched him the way she watched everything, steadily, without looking away, waiting to see what a thing was actually made of. What she saw was a man who knew what he was doing. He cleaned the wound himself. He didn't ask her for help, though she could see from the angle of it that it was nearly impossible to do left-handed. He worked in silence, methodical and unhurried, like a man who dealt with worse before and expected to deal with worse again. When he was done, he pulled his sleeve back down, held it with his opposite hand for a moment, and then looked around the barn. "You got needle and thread?" he asked. "In the house. I can do it myself if you bring it out." She looked at him. "You're going to sew your own arm?" "It's not the first time." She went and got the needle and thread. She stood and watched him do it. It was not a comfortable thing to watch. She'd sewn up horses and dogs, and once, memorably, her father's hand after a fence post went wrong. But Ethan Cole did it the same way he did everything else she'd seen him do so far. Quietly, without making a production of it. When he was done, he looked up and found her watching him. "Thank you," he said. "For the water? For this?" He nodded at the thread. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said. "You're sleeping in the barn, and I want you gone by morning if my cousins don't show back up." "And if they do show back up?" She picked up the rifle. "Then we'll talk about staying longer." Ethan nodded. He lay back in the hay, his hat over his face, and within what felt like minutes, he was asleep. Clara sat in the open barn door with the rifle across her knees and watched the yard go dark as the sun went down. And she thought about her father, and she thought about the paper her cousin Dade had waved in her face 2 days ago. A deed, he'd said, signed and legal, transferring the Whitmore land to a land trust out of San Antonio. And she thought about what it meant that the paper had Elias Whitmore's name on it, when Elias Whitmore had been dead and in the ground for 8 weeks, and had never in his life trusted a single lawyer he'd ever met. Her father had not signed that paper. She knew it the same way she knew the sound of the creek in spring, and the smell of rain coming in from the west. She knew it in her bones. Someone had forged it, and someone had sent Dade and his brothers to make sure she wasn't around to say so. She pressed her back against the barn door frame and looked up at the stars, vast and cold and indifferent above the Texas dark. "Papa," she whispered, "I'm going to figure out who did this." The stars didn't answer. The wind moved through the dry grass and said nothing. But somewhere in the barn behind her, Ethan Cole shifted in the hay and murmured something in his sleep. Just a word, just a sound. And for reasons she could not have explained and would not have admitted to anyone, Clara Whitmore felt, for the first time in 2 days, like she was not completely alone. He was awake before she was. She came out of the house in the gray pre-dawn, barefoot, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee she'd made on the wood stove, and found him standing in the yard with his horse, running his hands down the animal's legs with careful, focused attention. "How is she?" Clara asked. "She'll be all right. She needs rest." He stood up and looked at the leg. 3 days, maybe 4, before I'd put her on hard ground again. Clara held out one of the cups. He took it. "You know horses," she said. "Some." He drank the coffee without any expression, though it was bad coffee. She knew it was bad coffee. She'd never been as good at it as her mother. And then said, "You keep cattle here?" "We had 20 head. My cousins ran them off." She looked at the empty pen. "Part of making sure the place looked abandoned, I reckon." "Smart," Ethan said, then, at her look. "Smart in a bad way. I meant they knew what they were doing." "They've been planning this for a while," Clara said. "Dade always wanted this land, since we were children. He used to walk the fence line and say things like—" She paused, mimicking Dade's slow, deliberate voice. "Someday this is all going to be worth something, Clara. And it ought to be somebody's who knows what to do with it." She looked at Ethan. He meant himself. "What's the water situation?" "Creek on the south end runs year-round. Well by the house goes 30 feet. It's good land." She hated how much pride came into her voice when she said it, because pride felt dangerous right now, felt like something that could get her killed. But she couldn't help it. "My father carved this out of nothing. He didn't have money or connections or any of that. He just worked." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Where are your cousins based out of?" he said. "Town, Cassidy Creek, 6 miles east." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because 6 miles means they can come back fast, or they can take their time." He turned the tin cup in his hands. "A man who sends 3 men to do a job, and they come back saying it's done, he's not going to check right away. He's going to wait, let things settle." He looked at the fence line. "You've got time. Not a lot, but some." Clara studied him. "You talk like a man who's planned things before." He met her eyes. "I have." "What kind of things?" A pause that went on a beat too long. "The kind that don't need talking about now," he said. "What needs talking about now is what you're going to do with the time you have." "I'm going to hold this land," Clara said. There was no question in it, no wobble, just the flat, plain fact of it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, the way a person looks at something they're trying to decide about. "All right," he said finally. "All right what?" "All right, I'll stay." He finished the coffee, handed back the cup. 3 days, while the horse rests. I'll help you get the place back in shape. After that," he shrugged, "we'll see." Clara took the cup. She looked at the yard, the barn, the house, the fence line her father had built post by post over 2 decades. "I don't need charity," she said. "It's not charity," Ethan said. "I don't do charity. I'll work for the roof and the food, and when my horse is ready, I'll go." He looked at her sideways. "You can shoot me if I'm lying." "I know I can," Clara said. She turned and walked back toward the house. "Miss Whitmore!" he called after her. She stopped, looked back. "Thank you for the coffee," Ethan Cole said. "Even if it's terrible." Clara almost smiled. She didn't, but she almost did. "Breakfast in an hour," she said. "Don't be late." He was not late. He was already at the fence when she came out with the food, already working, pulling out a rotted post with his good arm and propping it against the rail while he dug a new hole beside it. He'd found the post hole digger in the barn without being told where it was, which meant he'd already looked around, which meant he'd been awake longer than she'd thought. She filed that away and said nothing about it. They ate without talking much. Clara watched the road east and he watched the road north, and they were both watching for the same thing, without saying so. After breakfast, he worked. She worked. The ranch was in a bad state. 3 weeks of no maintenance because for the first 2 weeks after her father's death, she'd been trying to handle the grief, and for the last week, she'd been handling her cousins. The fence was the most urgent thing, so they did that first. Then the water trough. Then the lean-to off the side of the barn that had taken a hard wind and was listing badly. He didn't make conversation. She didn't make conversation. But somewhere around noon, while they were working on the lean-to, he said without looking up from the beam he was bracing, "How old are you?" 17, Clara said. He was quiet a moment. "Your father taught you to shoot?" he said. "Since I was 9. He said a woman alone on the frontier needed to know 3 things: how to shoot, how to work, and how to think faster than the other person." She drove a nail. He was right. "He sounds like a smart man." "He was a great man," Clara said. "There's a difference." Ethan glanced at her, said nothing, went back to the beam. An hour later, without any particular transition, he said, "I was in the war, Union side, sharpshooter unit mostly. After the war I couldn't," he paused, "couldn't settle, kept moving. That's mostly what I've been doing since." Clara kept working. "What were you running from?" "Things I did, things I didn't do." He set the beam, test of it. "Both kinds bother you. One just bothers you louder." She thought about that. "Is that why you're bleeding in my yard instead of somewhere settled?" "Something like that." He picked up the next beam. "You're going to want to know that about me, since I'm staying. Better you hear it now." "What happened 2 days ago? The bullet?" "Bounty hunter." He said it flat, like it was just information. "I was wanted in Missouri for something I didn't do. Took me 2 years to prove it, and I proved it. But by then there was a man who didn't get the message, and I had to leave fast before I had to do something worse than run." Clara stopped working. She turned and looked at him full on. "You're wanted?" she said. "Was wanted. The warrant's been cleared." He met her eyes without flinching. "I'm telling you straight because you're going to find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me." A long silence. "Anything else you're telling me straight?" Clara said. He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "I'm 32 years old," he said. "I've got $20 and a horse and the clothes I'm wearing. I'm not a good man by the standards most people use. But I don't lie, and I don't steal, and I don't hurt people who aren't trying to hurt me first." He looked at her steadily. "That's the accounting of me. You can decide what to do with it." Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up her hammer. "Get that beam set," she said. "It's going to rain by tonight, and I want this finished." Ethan Cole picked up the beam, and for the first time in what felt like longer than she could measure, Clara Whitmore let herself think that maybe, she was going to be all right. The rain came just like she said it would. It came fast and hard, the way summer storms moved across the Texas plains. No warning except the smell of it, the sudden drop in the heat, and then the sky opening up like it had been holding back something enormous. They got inside just before it hit. Ethan took the barn with his horse. Clara took the house. She sat at her father's table, with the lamp burning and the rain coming down hard on the roof, and she ate her supper alone, the way she'd eaten every meal since he died. And she listened to the sound of the storm and thought about everything she knew. Dade had a document. Forged or bought, she didn't know which yet, but forged was her bet, because Dade wasn't smart enough to buy a real one, and mean enough not to care about the difference. He had 2 brothers. He had the certainty that she was dead. What she had was a rifle. A stranger in her barn, and 40 acres her father had bled for. She thought about the land trust name on the paper Dade had shown her. San Antonio Land and Cattle Trust. She'd never heard of it. Her father had never mentioned it. She was going to need to find out who was behind it, and she was going to need to do it before Dade came back. A knock at the door. She had the rifle in her hand before she was fully upright. Crossed the room. Stood to the side of the door. "Who is it?" "Cole." A pause. "Barn's leaking. Figured you ought to know which part so you can fix it tomorrow." She opened the door. Rain was driving sideways, and Ethan was standing on the porch with his hat pulled down, water coming off the brim in a steady stream. "Which part?" she said. "Southeast corner. The patch your father did on the roof. Looks recent. Didn't hold." It was recent. He did it in the spring. She looked past him at the dark. "You can sleep on the floor in here. There's a blanket." He looked at her. Looked at the rain. Looked back at her. "I'm fine in the barn," he said. "You're getting rained on. Miss Whitmore, there's a floor, there's a blanket, and we're wasting time arguing about it while you get soaked." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in or don't, but I'm closing this door." He came in. She gave him the blanket and pointed at the spot by the hearth and went to bed. And she lay there in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof and the sound of his breathing across the room. Slow, quiet, already gone into sleep. And she thought, he trusts me not to shoot him while he's sleeping. She thought, either he's a very foolish man or he's a very good judge of character. She thought, I haven't decided which yet. But she was already asleep before she finished thinking it. 3 days passed. They worked. They fixed what they could fix. Ethan found the cattle, or 4 of them anyway, which had drifted south to the creek, and he and Clara drove them back to the pen without any discussion about whether that was his job to do. He built a brace for the lean-to that was stronger than the original. He found the weak point in the north fence where something had pushed through. Probably a deer, but the kind of gap that could let more than deer through, and repaired it. He didn't talk about leaving. She didn't talk about him leaving. On the 4th morning, she came out and found him saddling his horse. She stopped. He was working the girth strap with his head down, not looking at her. The horse stood steady, rested now, the limp gone. "You're going," Clara said. "Horse is ready." He kept working. "Said 3 days. It's been 4. "I know what you said." He looked up then. His dark eyes were steady and unreadable, the way they always were. And Clara realized she'd been watching his face for 4 days trying to read it, and she still couldn't do it reliably, which was both frustrating and, she admitted to herself, interesting. "You'll be all right," he said. He paused. "You're more capable than most people I've met, man or woman." "I know I am," Clara said. She wasn't being prideful. She was just being accurate. "But capable doesn't mean I can hold off 3 armed men alone." He went back to the girth strap. She watched him. "There's something wrong with that deed," she said. "The one my cousin had. Someone in San Antonio forged it or bought it. Someone with enough power to make it look legal." She waited. "I need to find out who. And I need to do it before Dade figures out I'm still alive and comes back with more men." Ethan was quiet. "That's not a small problem," he said finally. "No," Clara agreed. "It's not." He stood there with his hand on the saddle. She stood there with the morning sun just starting to climb and the sound of the creek down south and the smell of hay and dust and everything her father had built around her. "I can't pay you," she said. "Not money. I've got the land and the cattle, and that's the sum of it." "I'm not looking for pay," Ethan said. "Then what are you looking for?" He was quiet so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. "A place to stop running," he said at last. The words came out slow, like they cost him something. "Somewhere that—" he shook his head. "Doesn't matter." "It matters," Clara said quietly. "Or you wouldn't have said it." He looked at her. She looked back. "Stay," she said. "Not for charity, not for pity. Stay because you've got nowhere to be, and I've got a fight coming that I'm not certain I can win alone." She held his gaze. "And because my father built something here worth fighting for, and I think you know what that looks like, even if you've never had it yourself." Something moved across his face. Something she couldn't name. Not quite pain and not quite hope, but something in the space between the two. He took his hand off the saddle. "All right," Ethan Cole said. "I'll stay." Clara nodded, looked at the fence line, looked at the yard. "Good," she said, "because the south pasture fence needs redoing, and I can't do it alone." She turned toward the house. "Breakfast first, then we work." She didn't look back, but she heard him unsaddle the horse, and she heard him say something very quiet, maybe to the horse, maybe to no one, maybe to whatever version of God a man like Ethan Cole had managed to hold on to through everything he'd seen. And she didn't catch the words, but it sounded, she thought, like relief. She found the second set of tracks on the 5th day. She was checking the south fence, the part they hadn't gotten to yet, when she saw them. Boot prints in the dry dust near the creek bank. Fresh. 2 men by the size and spacing. They'd stood in the trees on the far side of the water and looked at the ranch. She crouched down and studied them. They'd stood here a while, long enough to get a good look, long enough to count the smoke from the chimney and know someone was inside. She straightened up and walked back to the barn at a normal pace, not running, because running attracted attention and panic made you stupid. And she found Ethan inside, working on the tack. "We've got a problem," she said. He looked up. "Someone was watching the ranch," she said. "South side, across the creek. 2 men. They stood there long enough to know the place is occupied." Ethan set down the bridle. He was quiet for a moment. "When?" he said. "Last night, I think. The tracks were dry, but not old." She looked at him. "Dade knows I'm alive." Ethan stood up. He reached for his coat. "You sure it was connected to your cousins?" he said. "No," Clara said. "That's what worries me." She paused. "If it was Dade, he'd have come straight back with his brothers. He's not subtle." She met Ethan's eyes. "Someone else is watching this place. Someone who doesn't rush." Ethan looked at the rifle on the wall, then at the door, then back at her. "That's worse," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "I know." And in the late afternoon heat of that Texas summer, standing in her father's barn with the sound of the creek just audible from the south, Clara Whitmore understood for the first time that what was coming for her was bigger than 3 drunk cousins with a forged deed. Something else was at work here. Something patient. And patience, her father had always told her, was what you saw in men who were absolutely certain they were going to win. That night, neither of them slept much. Clara sat by the front window with the rifle across her knees, watching the dark tree line south of the creek. Ethan was in the barn, but she could tell from the occasional movement of shadow beneath the door that he wasn't sleeping either. They were like 2 people waiting for a storm they couldn't see yet, feeling it in the pressure of the air, in the way the horses wouldn't settle, in the specific quality of silence that wasn't really silence at all. By morning they had a plan. Not a good plan, Clara thought, but a real one. "We can't wait for them to come to us," Ethan said over breakfast. His voice was flat and certain, the voice of a man who'd learned his lessons the hard way. Waiting means they pick the time, and we pick nothing. What do you suggest? Information. He set down his cup. You said the deed named a land trust out of San Antonio. San Antonio Land and Cattle Trust. He looked at her. Somebody had to file that. Somebody had to notarize it. That's a paper trail. I can't go to San Antonio. That's 2 days' ride, and if Dade comes back while I'm gone, I'm not saying you go. He met her eyes. I'm saying we need someone in town who can ask the right questions without drawing attention. He paused. You got anybody in Cassidy Creek you trust? Clara thought about it. Reverend Alcott, she said, slowly. He married my parents, baptized me. He knew my father well. She hesitated. But Cassidy Creek is 6 miles, and Dade's people are in town. Does Dade know Alcott? Everybody knows Alcott. Does Alcott know Dade? Knows him and thinks poorly of him, Clara said. Papa used to say Reverend Alcott could read a man's soul in about 30 seconds. Said it was the most frightening thing he'd ever seen. Ethan picked up his hat. Then Alcott's our man. Clara looked at him. You're going into town. You can't go. Your cousins think you're dead. He settled the hat on his head. I'm just a drifter passing through. Nobody's looking for me. I can get to Alcott, tell him what's happening, and be back before dark. She wanted to argue. She could feel the argument sitting in her chest, the instinct to say she'd handle her own problems, that she didn't need a man riding into town on her behalf. But instinct without logic was just stubbornness, and her father had never had much patience for stubbornness that got in the way of clear thinking. Tell him everything, she said. The deed, the cousins, the tracks by the creek. She paused. Tell him I need to know who's behind the San Antonio Trust, and tell him... She stopped. Tell him what? Tell him my father did not sign that paper, Clara said. Tell him Elias Whitmore would have burned this land to the ground before he handed it to strangers. Reverend Alcott knew him. He'll believe it. Ethan nodded. He went out and saddled the horse. Clara watched him ride east toward town, and then she went back inside, and she did the only thing she could do, which was work. She worked the south fence alone. She worked hard and fast, driving posts until her hands blistered and her arms ached, because working kept her from thinking too much about the tracks by the creek and what they meant. She was halfway down the line when she heard the horse coming back and straightened up fast, hand going to the rifle at her hip. It was Ethan. He came in hard, not full gallop, but faster than a casual ride, and she could tell by the set of his shoulders before he even got close that something had happened. What? She said the moment he was near enough. He swung down. His jaw was tight. Alcott knows who runs the San Antonio Trust, he said. Clara felt something cold move through her. Who? Ethan looked at her steadily. Marshal Victor Hale. The name landed like a stone in still water. Victor Hale was not just a land speculator. Victor Hale was the law in 3 counties. He was the man who settled disputes, who issued warrants, who decided what was theft and what was commerce. He was the man whose word could make something legal or make something disappear. And he had bought Whitmore Ranch. Alcott said Hale's been acquiring land for the last 4 years, Ethan said. Small ranches mostly. Families with no legal connections, nobody to fight back. He finds a weakness, a death, a debt, a man with no sons, and he moves. His eyes stayed on hers. He's not a marshal first. He's a land broker first. The badge just makes the acquisition easier. Clara was quiet for a moment. She could feel her heartbeat very clearly in the bruised side of her face. He sent Dade, she said. Alcott thinks so. Dade would have approached Hale first. He'd have wanted money for the deed and for the... Ethan stopped. For what they did to you. Say it plainly, Clara said. For the attempt on your life. He said it flat and hard. Hale paid Dade to make it look like a family dispute over an inheritance. Clean. No involvement from outside. If you were dead and the deed was filed, nobody would look twice. Clara pressed her back against the fence post and stared at the grass at her feet. 17 years old, she thought. She'd been alive 17 years, and she was standing in a field talking about a man who'd paid her own blood to kill her over 40 acres of dry Texas land. How long before Hale finds out I'm alive? She said. Could be days, could be less. Ethan paused. The man who came back and told him the job was done. Roy, you said. Hale's going to be watching that story for cracks. The moment something doesn't add up, he'll check. Does Alcott know Roy? Roy Reed. He's run errands for Hale before, Alcott said. Small stuff, nothing that would hang him. Ethan looked at her carefully. Clara, Hale has warrants. He has deputies. If he decides you're a problem, he can make your death look legal. She looked up at him. Then we can't let him decide that, she said. We need proof, Ethan said. Real proof. That deed. Do you know where it is now? Dade had it. Dade files it in county records, and it's done. The land transfers. You're a trespasser on your own property. And any shot Hale's people take at you is a lawman removing a squatter. His voice was tight with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. We need a copy of what was filed. Something that shows the signature is forged. A witness who knew your father's hand. Alcott, Clara said immediately. He has letters from my father going back 15 years. He kept everything. Ethan was already nodding. I told him to get them together. He said he'd have them by Sunday. Today's Thursday. 3 days, Ethan said. We hold the ranch for 3 days. We keep our heads down, and we go to Alcott on Sunday. Clara looked at the tree line, looked at the fence, looked at her blistered hands. All right, she said. 3 days. The first day passed without incident, which somehow felt worse than trouble. The second day, she found the rabbit snares she'd set along the creek line had been moved. Not sprung. Moved. Someone had shifted them 6 inches in 3 of the 5 snares. Carefully, like they were making sure she'd notice. She brought the snares back to the barn and said nothing to Ethan at first. Just stood thinking about it, turning one of the wire loops over in her hands. Someone was in the creek line again, she said. He looked up from the harness he was working. Moving your snares, she said. It's a message. We know you're here, Ethan said. We know you know we're here, Clara corrected. There's a difference. They want us nervous. They want us to make a mistake. She set the snare down. It's what you do when you're not ready to move yet, but you want the other side off balance. Ethan stared at her. How do you know that? My father fought in the war. He talked about it sometimes, when he thought I was asleep. She met his eyes. Pressure before the push, he called it. You make the other side feel surrounded before you actually surround them. Gets them thinking defensive instead of strategic. Ethan was quiet. He was a smart man, he said finally. The smartest I knew, Clara said. She looked at the snares for a moment. Then she stood up and went to the wood stove and poured herself the last of the morning's coffee, cold now, and drank it standing up. I'm not going to sit here and wait to feel surrounded, she said. Sunday is 3 days out. We need to know more before then. What are you thinking? Roy Reed, she said. He lives in town. He looked away when his brothers were... She stopped briefly, then continued. when they did what they did. He told Dade I was dead, when he knew there was a chance I wasn't. She set down the cup. Roy's not like them, and a man who isn't like the people he's with is a man with a conscience that's eating at him. Ethan looked at her carefully. You want to approach him? I want you to approach him, Clara said. I want you to find Roy Reed in Cassidy Creek, and I want you to tell him that Clara Whitmore is alive, and that Marshal Victor Hale is the man who ordered her family killed, and that the only thing standing between Roy and an accessory charge is whether or not he decides to tell the truth. He might run straight to Dade. He might, Clara agreed. But Dade already knows I'm alive, or suspects it. Roy telling him doesn't change our position. She looked at Ethan. But Roy deciding to talk to us, that changes everything. Ethan turned the idea over. She could see him working through the angles the same way she'd worked through them, checking for the hole in the logic. He found one. If Roy goes to Hale instead of Dade, he said slowly, then Hale moves faster than planned, and we know it's because Roy told him, Clara said. Which means we know Roy's useless, and we know Hale's timeline. You've been thinking about this all night, Ethan said. Most of it, she admitted. He stood up. I'll find Roy Reed. Be careful how you approach him. He's scared. Scared men are unpredictable. I've dealt with scared men before. Not this kind, Clara said. Roy's scared of his own conscience. That's different from scared of getting caught. You can reason with a man afraid of his conscience. You can't push him. Ethan looked at her with that expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was measuring something about her, filing it away. You're going to be all right, he said. Not like reassurance, like a simple statement of observed fact. I know, Clara said. He left. She went back to work. He came back that evening with Roy Reed riding beside him. Clara heard 2 sets of hoofbeats and had the rifle out before she reached the door. She held it lowered when she saw the second rider. Young, not more than 20, with a face that had been crying and trying to hide it. And she stepped back and let them both inside. Roy Reed stood in the middle of her father's kitchen and couldn't look at her directly. Miss Whitmore, he said. His voice broke on the second word. Sit down, Roy, she said. He sat. Tell me about the deed, she said. He told her. It came out in pieces, halting, ashamed, the story of a young man who'd been following his older brother since childhood and had walked too far down a road to know how to turn around. Dade had found Hale 6 months ago, or Hale had found Dade. Roy wasn't certain which. The arrangement was simple. Dade would provide the family connection, the local knowledge, the deed with Elias Whitmore's signature on it. In exchange, Hale would give Dade $200 and clear title to 20 acres of creekland adjacent to the main ranch. Dade forged the signature? Clara said. Hale had someone do it, a man from San Antonio. Came out here 3 months before your father died, spent an afternoon with Dade going over your father's letters, practicing the hand. Roy swallowed hard. It's good work. I don't know if you can prove it's wrong. Let me worry about that, Clara said. What else? Roy looked at his hands. Hale put a man in town, watching for any word about the ranch. That's who was in your creek line. 2 of Hale's deputies. Off the books, doing it unofficial. He finally looked at her. Miss Whitmore, I am so sorry. About what they did. I didn't know they were going to hurt you. I knew they wanted the land, but I didn't know it was going to go. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I looked away. I shouldn't have looked away. Silence. No, Clara said quietly. You shouldn't have. Roy put his face in his hands. You can't undo it, she said, and her voice wasn't cruel, just clear, the way her father had always been clear. But you can do something useful now. Alcott has my father's letters. On Sunday, we're going to Alcott's with those letters and the deed your brother has, and we're going to sit down with Judge Patterson in county seat and show him the difference between your father's real signature and a forgery." She leaned forward. "Can you get the deed from Dade?" Roy looked up at her with something that was terrified and hopeful all at once. "He keeps it in the saddlebag," he said slowly, "in the stable out back of the saloon. Can you get it tonight?" Roy was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Don't tell Dade you're taking it," Ethan said. He spoke to Roy steadily, without threat in his voice. "Take it quiet and bring it here. You'll be a witness to a forgery, that's all. That's what gets you clear of this." "And Hale?" Roy said. "Let us worry about Hale," Clara said. Roy left an hour after he arrived. He rode back toward town in the last of the evening light, and Clara stood in the doorway watching him go. Ethan stood just behind her. "You think he'll get it?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "He wants to make it right. Men who want to make things right are the most reliable people in the world, because they're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves." "And if Dade catches him going through the saddlebag?" Clara picked up the rifle. "Then we'll know before midnight," she said. The night stretched out long and tight. Clara sat at the table. Ethan sat by the window. The lamp burned low, and neither of them spoke. And the dark outside was deep and absolute, the way Texas dark could be when the moon was new. An hour past midnight. Hoofbeats. Clara was on her feet. Ethan already had his hand on his gun. The hoofbeats stopped at the gate. One rider. "It's me," Roy called out. His voice was shaking. "I got it." Clara exhaled. She went to the door, and he came inside, and he laid the folded paper on her father's table, and she spread it out under the lamp and looked at it. Looked at the signature at the bottom. Elias Whitmore, in black ink. And she knew. She knew the way she knew her own reflection. The loop on the E was wrong. Her father made his E's with a short top bar. Always had. She'd watched him write 100 letters. This E had a long top bar. It wasn't her father's hand. "That's not his signature," she said. Not to Roy, not to Ethan. Just out loud. Just for the record. She folded the paper and held it. 3 days, she said quietly. 3 more days, and we take this to Alcott. She looked up at the window. The dark outside was quiet, but she knew, they all knew, that it wasn't going to stay that way. Hale's deputies were in the creek line. Roy had just stolen the deed from Dade's saddlebag, and somewhere in 3 counties, a man with a badge and a land empire was going to notice that his carefully constructed plan had started to develop holes. The pressure before the push, her father's words. It was coming. She looked at Ethan across the lamplight. He was already looking at her. "Get some sleep," she said. "Both of you. Tomorrow, we need to be sharp." Roy slept on the floor. Ethan went back to the barn. And Clara sat at the table with her father's lamp burning beside the forged deed. And she held it together with everything she had, because falling apart was not something she had the time for, and never had been. Outside, something moved in the tree line. She didn't look. She'd seen it. It didn't matter. They could watch all they wanted. The deed was in her hands now. And tomorrow, the game was going to change. Roy was gone before sunrise. He didn't wake them to say goodbye. He just left. Clara found the blanket folded neat on the kitchen floor, and the front door pulled shut behind him. And she stood there a moment, looking at that folded blanket, and thinking about what it cost a young man to do what Roy Reed had done last night. Not much, maybe, by most measures. But by the measure of a boy who'd spent his whole life following his older brothers, it had cost him everything he'd known. She hoped it would be enough to save him. She put the deed inside her father's Bible, wrapped the Bible in oilcloth, set it under the floorboard in the bedroom where her father had kept his emergency cash, $40, which Dade's men hadn't found because they hadn't looked hard enough. She put the cash in her coat pocket and the Bible under the board, and the board back flush with the floor. And then she stood up and went to start the morning fire. Ethan came in from the barn while the coffee was heating. He looked at her face and didn't ask how she'd slept.
"Roy got out clean?" he said.
"Looks like it." She set 2 cups on the table. 2 days until Sunday. 2 days is a long time. I know. They drank their coffee. The morning was quiet in the way that made Clara's shoulders tight. The specific quiet of a situation that had been held together with careful hands and was starting to want to come apart. "Dade's going to notice the deed is missing," Ethan said. "Probably already has." She looked at the window. "Question is what he does when he notices. Does he go to Hale, or does he come here first?" "Man like Dade goes to Hale," Ethan said. "Dade doesn't make a move without permission anymore. He sold that right when he took the money." Clara considered that. "So Hale knows by this morning?" "Or last night." The fire crackled. Outside, one of the horses shifted in the pen. Then, from the direction of the road, the sound of a single rider coming fast. Both of them were on their feet before the sound registered fully. Clara at the window, rifle up. Ethan flat against the wall beside the door. The rider came through the gate without slowing, and Clara had her finger on the trigger when she saw the coat. Reverend Alcott. He was 63 years old, and he rode like a much younger man when he had cause to. And right now he had cause. He pulled up in the yard and was off the horse before it fully stopped, and his face when he came through the door told Clara everything she needed to know before he said a word. "He knows you're alive," Alcott said. He was breathing hard. He grabbed Clara by both arms, held her at arm's length, looked at her bruised face with an expression that moved through grief and fury and landed somewhere resolute. "Victor Hale knows you're alive, child. He's putting out a warrant." The word hit the room like a physical thing. "On what charge?" Ethan said. Alcott looked at him, a quick, assessing look, and then back at Clara. "Theft. He's saying you stole the deed to this property from its rightful owner, and that you're occupying the land illegally." His voice was controlled, but barely. "He had it drafted last night. Judge Connolly signed it this morning." "Connolly's in Hale's pocket," Clara said flatly. "Has been for 2 years." Alcott released her arms. "There's more. He's posted a reward." Clara went still. "How much?" Ethan said. $500. Alcott looked between them. "For the return of the deed and the removal of any trespasses from the property." He paused deliberately. He didn't say return alive. $500. In 1876 Texas, that was more than most men made in 2 years. That was the kind of money that made bounty hunters ride through the night. That was the kind of money that made men do things they'd spend the rest of their lives not talking about. Clara felt it settle into her chest like a stone dropping into deep water. "How long before someone comes?" she said. "There were men at the saloon when I left," Alcott said. "Listening, calculating." He looked at her hard. "Clara, you cannot wait until Sunday." "I have the deed," she said. "Roy brought it last night." Alcott blinked. For just a moment, the fear in his face cracked open, and something else came through. "You have it? The original?" "Under the floorboard." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for hours. "Then we go today, right now. Judge Patterson is in county seat. That's 12 miles north. If we can get there before Hale puts men on the North Road—" "He'll already have men on the North Road," Ethan said. Everyone looked at him. He was standing with his arms crossed, thinking, not looking at either of them, the way he got when he was working through a problem that had no clean solution, only the least bad option available. Hale didn't post that warrant because he's confident, Ethan said slowly. He posted it because something surprised him. Roy taking the deed surprised him. He's moving fast now, which means he's moving sloppy. He looked at Clara. A man moving sloppy makes the road he'd normally control the one he forgets. Which road does he forget? Clara said. Not the North Road. That's the obvious play. County seat, judge, legal resolution. He's got that covered. Ethan pushed off the wall. But Hale didn't get where he is by only controlling the obvious play. He controls the roads because he controls the story. He looked at Alcott. Reverend, is there a newspaper in County Seat? Alcott looked startled. The Patterson Courier. Henry Marsh runs it. He paused. He's an honest man, one of the few left. If the story is already public before we walk into a courthouse, Hale can't make us disappear quietly, Ethan said. He needs quiet, a warrant he can control, a judge he owns. What he can't control is a story in print that 40 people have already read. Clara looked at him. You want to go to a newspaper? I want to go to a newspaper first, then the courthouse. He met her eyes. We give Marsh the deed, the letters Alcott has, and Clara's testimony. He prints it. Once it's in print, killing us makes Hale look worse, not better. And men who've built what Hale's built don't risk looking worse. The room was very quiet. Alcott looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. That's a gamble, she said. Everything from here is a gamble, he said simply. I'm just picking the one where we control more of the variables. Clara went to the bedroom, pulled up the floorboard, retrieved the Bible, unwrapped the oilcloth, and took out the deed and held it in her hands for a moment. This piece of paper that had cost her family everything. And then she folded it and put it inside her coat. Get the letters, she said to Alcott. We leave in 10 minutes. They didn't make it 10 minutes. They made it 4. Ethan had gone to saddle the horses, and Clara was pulling on her coat when she heard him come back in fast. Not running, but close. And the expression on his face stopped her cold. 3 riders, he said quietly. Coming from the east. Moving slow. Spread out. He looked at Alcott. They're not Dadesmen. These are professionals. Alcott went white. Clara felt the familiar cold clarity settle over her. She'd felt it the morning after the beating, when she'd decided to get up. She felt it now. Everything unnecessary went quiet, and what remained was simple. What do I have? What do I need? What happens next? The North Road is blocked, she said. They'd have sent men ahead, Ethan agreed. These 3 are the visible ones. There are more. Can we go south? Cross the creek and cut through the Harmon property? Harmon sold to Hale last year, Alcott said, his voice tight. I should have told you. I'm sorry, It's all right. Clara was already moving to the window, looking at the riders. They were taking their time, letting themselves be seen. Pressure before the push. She recognized it now, without her father's voice in her head. These men wanted her to run. Running people made mistakes. Reverend, she said, get on your horse and ride back to town. Clara, I'm not leaving you. You are. She turned to face him, and her voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. You're a man of God, riding away from a ranch. That's not suspicious. That's normal. But I need you in town, not here. She held his gaze. I need you to go to every person in Cassidy Creek who knew my father, and you tell them what's happening. You tell them Victor Hale paid 3 men to beat a 17-year-old girl and steal her family's land. You say it out loud, in public, where people can hear." She paused. "Can you do that?" Alcott looked at her for a long moment. She watched him find something inside himself. The same thing her father had always found when the world asked more than it had a right to. The backbone underneath everything else. "Your father would be proud of you," he said roughly. "Go," Clara said. He went. She turned back to Ethan. "How long before they reach the gate?" 6, 7 minutes. They're not rushing." He checked his gun. "They want to talk first. Find out if the deed is here before they do anything else. They want to take it back. They want to take it back and make us into trespassers in front of witnesses who aren't here yet." His eyes were steady. "If we let them in the yard, we're on their terms." "Then we don't let them in the yard." Ethan looked at her. "I'm not suggesting we shoot first," Clara said carefully. "But there's a difference between meeting men in your yard and meeting them from your porch with a rifle and the legal deed to your property in your hand." She held up the folded paper. "They have a warrant. We have the original title. One of those things is real. Hale's warrant is signed by a judge. Hale's warrant is signed by a judge he owns." She moved to the front door. "You said yourself a man moving fast moves sloppy. Let's see what sloppy looks like up close." Ethan was quiet for a beat. Then he moved to stand just behind her left shoulder. "You do the talking," he said. "I'll handle anything else." Clara opened the door and walked out onto the porch. The three men pulled up at the gate. They were exactly what Ethan had said. Professionals. Not Dade's raw aggression, not Roy's nervous guilt. These were men who did this work with the same attitude a carpenter brought to building a fence. Methodical, impersonal. The one in front was maybe 45, with a deputy star pinned to his coat and the kind of eyes that had stopped finding people interesting a long time ago. "Miss Whitmore?" he called out. "That's right," Clara said. "I'm Deputy Garner. I have a warrant for your arrest and for the recovery of stolen property." He reached into his coat, produced a paper, held it up. "You're to come peaceable and surrender the deed to the Whitmore property immediately." Clara held up her own paper. "I have the original title to this land, filed in 1853 by Elias Whitmore with the Texas Land Office. If you'd like to come look at it, you're welcome." She didn't move off the porch. "I'd also like to see that warrant up close, Deputy. I have a right to read what I'm being charged with." Garner looked at her. His horse shifted. "Miss..." "She said she'd like to read the warrant," Ethan said from just behind her shoulder. He said it quietly and without aggression, and it landed exactly the way she'd hoped it would. As a reminder that Clara Whitmore was not standing on this porch alone. Garner looked at Ethan, looked back at Clara. Something calculated behind his eyes. "Who are you?" he said to Ethan. "Ethan Cole. I work this ranch." "You got any legal standing here?" "Miss Whitmore just told you I work here, on her land." Ethan met Garner's stare, without any heat in it. "That's standing enough." One of the other two deputies had drifted left while Garner talked. Slow, casual, like he was just letting his horse find easier ground. Clara tracked him in her peripheral vision without looking directly at him. The third man had gone right, not far, but far enough. They were being bracketed. "Deputy Garner," Clara said, keeping her voice clear and carrying, "I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. You've been sent here by Marshal Victor Hale to recover a deed that was forged." She raised her voice slightly on the word, let it sit in the air. "Forged using a copied version of my father's signature, by a man brought in from San Antonio. I have the original title. I have letters in my father's hand that any honest examiner can compare." She paused. "Before you execute this warrant, I want you to think about whether Victor Hale is the kind of man who'll stand beside you when this comes apart." Something moved across Garner's face. Just a flicker. "The warrant's legal," he said. "The warrant's signed by Judge Connolly," Clara said, "who I imagine you know very well." Garner was silent. "I'm not resisting," Clara said. "I'm asking you to look at what you're being used for." The deputy on her left had stopped drifting. The one on the right had too. Garner looked at his men, and then at Clara, and then at Ethan, and Clara could feel the whole moment balanced on a knife edge, the specific instant before something breaks one way or another. Then Garner said, "Get down off the porch, miss." He decided. Clara felt Ethan move before she heard him. A single step forward that put him level with her, shoulder to shoulder. And he said in the same quiet voice he used for everything, "We'll come with you peaceable to the county seat. Not to Cassidy Creek. Not to Marshal Hale. County seat, Judge Patterson. In front of people who haven't been bought." He looked at Garner. "That's the offer. You can write it up however you need to." Another long silence. Garner looked at him the way a man looks at something he can't quite get the measure of. "County seat," Ethan repeated, "with the deed and the letters and Miss Whitmore as a witness. You do this right, and you're the deputy who solved the land fraud. You do it Hale's way, and you're the man who helped bury a 17-year-old girl's inheritance." He let that breathe. Garner looked down at his saddle horn for a long moment. "Mount up," he said finally, to Clara, not unkindly. Clara went inside, got the Bible, took out her father's letters from where Alcott had left them the previous visit, in a leather pouch on the table. She took the deed from her coat, folded everything together, careful and deliberate, and put it back against her chest. She walked out and mounted the horse Ethan had brought around. Ethan mounted beside her. Garner looked at them both, and then looked at his deputies, and then looked at the road north. "Stay close," he said, "and don't make me regret this." "Deputy," Clara said, "you're doing the right thing." He didn't answer. He just turned his horse north and started riding, and Clara and Ethan fell in behind him, and the ranch fell away behind them. Her father's fence, her father's barn, her father's 40 acres of dry, stubborn Texas land. And Clara kept her back straight and her face forward, and she didn't let herself think about what happened if they didn't reach Patterson before Hale's other men reached them. She thought about her father's letters in her coat, thought about the loop of the E and the long top bar that wasn't his. She thought, hold on, just hold on a little longer. They were 3 miles north on the county road when the second group of riders appeared ahead. 4 men, blocking the road. Not deputies, and at the front of them, riding a gray horse with the easy authority of a man who'd never once in his life believed the rules applied to him, Marshal Victor Hale. Garner pulled up. Hale rode forward alone. He was maybe 50, silver-haired, with a face built for trust, the kind of face that looked honest from every angle and was hollow all the way through. He looked at Garner first, then at Clara. He took his time with her. "Miss Whitmore," he said pleasantly, "I'm glad to see you alive." "I'm sure you are," Clara said. Something dangerous moved behind his eyes, but his smile didn't change. "Garner," Hale said, not looking away from Clara, "what's the situation?" "Riding to county seat," Garner said carefully. "Miss Whitmore agreed to come peaceable." "County seat," Hale repeated. He said it the way a person says a word they find mildly ridiculous. "That's a long ride. A lot of things can happen on the long ride." He tilted his head. "I think it would be simpler to handle this locally." "Locally means your courthouse and your judge," Clara said. "So no." Hale looked at her with the measured patience of a man who was deciding how much of his real self to show.
"Young lady," he said quietly, "you have no idea what you've walked into."
"I know exactly what I've walked into," Clara said. "Your man came to San Antonio and spent an afternoon copying my father's handwriting. Your arrangement with my cousin cost my father his land and almost cost me my life." She looked at him without flinching. "And I have everything I just said in a form that Judge Patterson is going to find very interesting." Hale was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Garner. "That deed," he said simply. And Garner, to his credit, to the credit of whatever conscience still lived in him, did not move. "Marshal," Garner said slowly, "she's got the original title. I'm aware of what she has." "Then you're aware it changes things." Hale looked at Garner for a long time, the look of a man deciding whether a tool is still useful or has become a liability. "Garner," he said, "stand down." "Marshal, I said stand down." Garner went quiet. His hand dropped to his saddle horn. He was not going to help, but he was not going to stop it either. The choice had broken something in him, and he was just sitting there, holding the pieces. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the four men behind Hale, looked at their hands, looked at the space between the road and the tree line east. He was calculating. "Clara," he said, very low, without looking at her, "when I move, you ride east. Don't look back." "Ethan, the tree line is 60 yards. Your horse is rested." His voice was absolutely calm. "Don't stop until you're through the trees and on the other side." "I'm not leaving you." "I'm not asking you to leave me. I'm asking you to run, so there's still something worth coming back to." He finally looked at her, briefly, and his dark eyes were clear and direct, and held something she hadn't seen in them before. "Go." Hale's hand moved toward his holster, and everything happened at once. Ethan spurred his horse straight at Hale's group, not to shoot, not yet, but to scatter, to create confusion, to buy 6 seconds out of nothing. Clara's horse was already turning east before she'd made the conscious decision to turn it, her heels in the animal's flanks, the Bible pressed against her chest with one arm, the sound of shouts and hoofbeats exploding behind her. 60 yards, she counted them. The tree line came up fast and she went through it without slowing. Branches, shadows, the sudden cool of the shade, and she didn't look back. She didn't look back. But she could hear behind her the sound of a single gunshot, and then silence. And she rode. She rode for 20 minutes before she let the horse slow. The tree line had given way to open scrub, and then to a dry creek bed that cut east toward lower ground. And Clara followed it because it was cover, and because her horse knew water even when the creek was running thin. And because she needed to think, and thinking required not dying first. She pulled up in the shallow creek bed and listened. No hoofbeats behind her. No voices. Just the dry Texas morning and the sound of her own breathing and the horse blowing hard beneath her. One gunshot. She'd heard one gunshot. She pressed her hand flat against the Bible inside her coat and made herself breathe slow and deliberate, the way her father had taught her. In through the nose, count 4, out through the mouth. Because panic was a luxury, and she did not have the means to afford it. Ethan had gone straight at 4 armed men to buy her 60 yards. She didn't know if he was alive. She sat with that for exactly as long as she could stand it, which was about 30 seconds. And then she made herself think instead of feel, because feeling would come later, after, when she had earned the right to it. What did she have? The deed, the letters, Her father's Bible with his name on the first page, in his real handwriting. The short top bar on the E. The way he made his T's with a flat horizontal stroke that listed slightly left. Evidence that any honest man could read. What did she need? Judge Patterson, county seat. 12 miles north, and she was 3 miles in, and Hale had men on the road. She looked east. She looked north. She looked at the creek bed cutting south and thought about what her father had always said about problems that blocked the front door. Go around, he'd said. A wall is only a wall if you stand in front of it. She turned the horse north and stayed in the creek bed. She found Tommy Reed an hour later. She almost didn't see him. He was tucked into a hollow beneath the bank of the creek bed, small and still, the way frightened animals got small and still. And she only spotted him because her horse shied sideways, and she looked down to see what had spooked it, and found a boy of about 12 staring up at her with enormous eyes and a face that had been through something recent and terrible. He had a cut above his left eye that had bled down the side of his face and dried there. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He was holding a broken knife handle like it was the most important thing he owned. Clara pulled up, looked at him. "You hurt?" she said. He stared at her. "The cut on your head," she said. "Is it bad?" He touched his forehead like he'd forgotten it was there. "No, ma'am." His voice was rough. "I don't reckon." "What's your name?" A pause. "Tommy? Tommy Reed?" Reed. She filed that away without showing it on her face. Roy's last name was Reed. She looked at the boy more carefully. There was something around the jaw and the eyes that was familiar now that she was looking for it. But Roy was 20, and this boy was 12. Not brothers. Cousins, maybe. Or something more distant. "Who did that to your face, Tommy?" He looked at the knife handle in his hands. "Men came to our camp," he said. "Mama and I. We've been traveling since Papa died in the spring. We stopped to water the horse on the road north. 3 men came." He stopped. Clara waited. "They took the horse," he said, "and the wagon. Mama told me to run." He looked up at her, and his face was doing the thing faces did when they were trying very hard not to break. "She said run and don't stop, and I ran and I didn't stop, and I don't know—" His voice cracked clean through. "I don't know if she's all right." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought, "I am 17 years old, and I have a forged deed, and a dead father, and a man who may or may not be alive somewhere behind me, and I am being hunted by the most powerful person in 3 counties." She thought, "I don't have time for this." She thought, "My father would have already had this boy on the back of this horse." "Come up here," she said, and reached her hand down. Tommy Reed stared at her hand. Then he reached up and took it, and she pulled him up behind her in the saddle, and he held on to the back of her coat with both fists, and she turned the horse north again. "What men?" she said as they moved. "The ones who took your wagon. Did you see them clearly?" "One had a deputy star," Tommy said. "He didn't act like a deputy, though. He just watched while the others took the things." Off the books, Clara thought. Hale's people working unofficial, same as the men in her creek line. She pressed her jaw tight. The reach of it, how far it extended, how many people Hale had turned into instruments, made something cold and furious turn over in her chest. "There's a town north of here," she said. "County seat. Do you know it?" "No, ma'am." "That's where we're going. When we get there, I'm going to need you to tell a judge exactly what you just told me. Can you do that?" "About the men taking our things?" "About the deputy star. About what he did and didn't do." She felt him nod against her back. "It matters, Tommy. What you saw matters." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you in trouble, ma'am?" "Some," Clara said. "What kind?" "The kind where the law is on the wrong side," she said. "But we're going to fix it." Another pause. "My mama always said trouble with the law was the worst kind," Tommy said. "Your mama's right," Clara said. "Hold on tight. We're going to move faster." She pushed the horse into a canter, and they moved north through the scrub with the Texas sun climbing overhead, and Clara watched the horizon and thought about Ethan, and didn't let herself think about him, and watched the horizon again. She heard the rider behind her 20 minutes out from the county seat. One horse. Coming steady, not charging. The pace of someone tracking, not chasing. She pulled up and turned, and her hand went to the rifle, and she almost fired before she recognized the horse. Dark bay, favoring nothing. Ethan. He looked terrible. His left arm was held close to his body in a way that said something had happened to it. And his hat was gone, and there was blood on the side of his face from something she couldn't identify at this distance. But he was upright, and he was riding, and he was alive. And Clara felt something release in her chest that had been wound tight since the moment she'd heard that shot. She waited for him to reach her. He pulled up alongside, looked at Tommy Reed behind her. "Who's this?" he said. "Tommy Reed," Clara said. "He's a witness." She looked at Ethan's arm. "How bad?" "Grazed. It'll hold." He looked at her steadily. "You all right?" "Yes." She wanted to say more than that. She didn't have the words for it yet, and they didn't have the time. "Hale?" Went back toward town. Something moved in his jaw. "Garner rode with me. He's—" Ethan paused. "He did something right, in the end. Got between me and one of Hale's men." He looked at the road north. "He's behind me about a quarter mile, riding slow. He took a hit." "Is he—" "Alive. Shoulder." Ethan looked at her. "He made a choice, Clara." She understood what he was saying. Garner had picked a side, and the side he'd picked had cost him. Whatever he'd been, whatever Hale had made of him, he'd found something at the bottom of it that was still worth something. "We go together," Clara said. They rode the last miles 3 abreast. Clara and Ethan and Tommy Reed, with Garner a quarter mile behind them coming slow, and the county seat came up out of the Texas morning like something ordinary, like a place that didn't know it was about to become the fulcrum everything turned on. Judge Arthur Patterson was 60 years old, and he had presided over the county seat court for 19 of them. And in those 19 years, he had developed 2 things in considerable quantity: a talent for reading a situation, and an absolute contempt for men who used legal instruments as weapons. He looked at Clara Whitmore across his desk, at her bruised face and her split lip, and the way she sat in the chair like she'd been sitting in difficult chairs her whole life, and had learned not to let them beat her. And he looked at the deed and the letters spread out before him. And he looked at the old Bible open to the first page, and he was quiet for a very long time. "You're 17, he said. "Yes, sir." "Your father died in April." "April 12th. He picked up one of the letters, held it beside the deed, looked at the 2 signatures for a long time without speaking. His face gave nothing away, but his hands were careful with the letters, in a way that told Clara he understood what they were. "Victor Hale," he said finally. Not a question. "Yes, sir." Patterson set the letter down. "I have known Victor Hale for 14 years. He folded his hands on the desk. "I have also suspected Victor Hale of at least 4 fraudulent land acquisitions in those same 14 years, and been unable to prove a single one, because the families involved were small and isolated and Hale was very thorough. He looked at her. Until now. Clara held herself very still. The E, Patterson said. Your father's E. Short top bar, Clara said. Always, since I was a little girl. He wrote the same way every time. Patterson looked at the deed again. This E has a long top bar. He tapped the paper lightly. It's good work. Whoever did it was skilled. But they weren't your father. He looked up. That's my observation. I'll want a proper examiner to confirm it. But I have looked at a great many signatures in 19 years, and I know what I'm looking at. He stood up. Where is Deputy Garner? He said. Doctor's office, Ethan said from the doorway. Shoulder wound. He came willingly? He came, Ethan said. That's enough for now. Patterson nodded slowly. He went to the window and stood looking out at the street. Hale is going to know you're here within the hour, he said. He has people in this town. I know, Clara said. He'll come with deputies, legal papers. He'll try to make this about a stolen deed rather than a forged one. He turned back from the window. What he will not be prepared for is a sitting judge who has already seen the evidence and made a determination. Something shifted in the room. You're making a determination? Clara said carefully. I'm making a preliminary finding, Patterson said, that this deed, he touched it without picking it up, was fraudulently obtained using a forged signature, and that the Whitmore property has been illegally transferred under false legal pretense. He looked at her. That finding goes into the official record today, right now, before Hale walks through my door. He paused. After that, there will be a full investigation. There will be charges, and Victor Hale will answer for what he's done. The silence in the room was the kind that happened when something large and inevitable finally shifted into place. Tommy Reed was sitting in the corner chair where they'd put him, too small for it, his feet not quite reaching the floor, watching everything with those enormous eyes. He'd given his account to Patterson's clerk, the deputy star, the men, his mother on the road, and the clerk had written it down, and Tommy had signed it in the careful printing of a boy who'd been taught to write by someone who loved him. Clara looked at him now. He looked back at her. What about his mother? Clara said. She was on the North Road. She needs... I'll send a man, Patterson said immediately. He called out to the clerk in the next room, gave the instruction. They heard the clerk move. Tommy Reed's shoulders dropped an inch. He hadn't known until right now that he'd been holding them up. Tommy, Clara said, she's going to be all right. He nodded. He looked at his hands. He looked at Clara. Are you going to be all right? He said. She almost smiled. 12 years old and worried about her. She thought of her father, who had never once in his life walked past a person who needed something without stopping, even when stopping cost him. I'm working on it, she said. Hale arrived 47 minutes later. Clara knew he was coming because she could hear him from inside the courthouse, his voice carrying before he'd even come through the door. That smooth, commanding tone that was used to filling rooms and bending them. Patterson's clerk stepped out and spoke to him in the doorway. Clara watched through the interior window. She watched Hale's face when the clerk said the words, preliminary finding. She watched the smooth authority crack for just a moment. Not much, just a hairline fracture, before it reassembled. Then Hale walked into the building. He stopped when he saw her. She was sitting at the long table in the record room, straight-backed, hands folded, the letters and the deed and her father's Bible laid out in front of her, like she was waiting for a church service to begin. Ethan was standing by the far wall. Tommy Reed had been moved to the clerk's office. Hale looked at her for a long moment. You're persistent, he said. My father's land, Clara said simply. He looked at the letters, at the deed, at the Bible. He took his time, and she let him take it, because the calculation he was doing right now, the one where he was measuring what could still be saved and what was gone, that calculation was working in her favor, and they both knew it. Whatever you think you have, he began. I have my father's handwriting, Clara said. In 15 letters, written over 15 years to Reverend Alcott. I have an original title filed in 1853 with the Texas Land Office. I have a forged deed with a signature that doesn't match. She looked at him steadily. And I have a judge who has already seen all of it and written a preliminary finding into the official record. Hale's jaw was very tight. I also have Tommy Reed, Clara continued, who watched one of your off-the-books deputies stand by while his mother was robbed on the North Road this morning. She let that sit. And I have Roy Reed, who will testify to the arrangement between you and my cousin Dade. She paused. And I have Garner, who is at the doctor's office right now, and who made a choice this morning that I think you understand the implications of. The room was very quiet. Hale looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. Who are you? Hale said. Nobody important, Ethan said. Just a man who works the ranch. Something moved in Hale's face. He was doing the math, the specific, brutal arithmetic of a man who had built something large and intricate, and was watching the foundation crack. This isn't over, he said. But the voice had changed. The room-filling certainty was gone from it, replaced by something thinner. It is over, Clara said. You just don't know it yet. Hale looked at her one more time, the look of a man memorizing something. And then he turned and walked out. Patterson came in from the adjoining room 30 seconds later. He'd been listening. He'll run, Ethan said. Let him run, Patterson said. He runs, he confirms everything. He stays and fights, he confirms everything a different way. He picked up his pen and sat down at the table. Either road leads to the same place. Clara watched the door Hale had walked out of. She thought about her father's fence line, his well, the sound of the creek in summer, the 40 acres he'd carved from nothing with his hands. My land, she said quietly, just to herself. Patterson looked up. Miss Whitmore, as of this morning's finding, yes, your land. She nodded. She looked at Ethan. He was already watching her, and there was something in his face. Not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something warmer, that she let herself look at directly for the first time. We should get back, she said. We should, he agreed. Tommy Reed appeared in the doorway of the clerk's office. He was holding the piece of paper. The clerk had given him something to draw on while he waited, some small kindness, and he looked at Clara with that careful, measuring look she was starting to recognize. Can I come? He said. Clara looked at him. She thought about the folded blanket on her father's kitchen floor. She thought about her father's voice. A wall is only a wall if you stand in front of it. She thought about what it meant that this boy had shown up in a creek bed with a broken knife and nothing else on the same morning she'd needed a witness. Tommy, she said, where else would you go? He didn't answer. He just walked over and stood next to her, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched her arm. And it was such a specific, unself-conscious thing, the way a child stood next to someone they'd decided to trust, that something in Clara's chest did a thing she didn't have a name for. Ethan looked at the boy, looked at Clara. 3 of us, he said. 3 of us, Clara agreed. She picked up her father's Bible from the table, held it against her chest. They walked out of the courthouse together. The girl who wouldn't stay dead, the cowboy who couldn't stop moving,
and the boy who had nowhere left to go. And they walked into the Texas summer morning, and none of them looked back. But Hale was still out there, and 3 people riding back to a 40-acre ranch were not the same as 3 people safe. Patterson had the finding. He had the evidence. But findings took time, and warrants took time, and a man like Victor Hale, with everything unraveling around him, was at his most dangerous exactly now. Clara knew it. Ethan knew it. They rode south without talking about it, because there wasn't anything to say that the silence wasn't already saying. The ranch was waiting, and somewhere between the county seat and home, Clara Whitmore made the last decision she had left to make. She was not going to wait for Hale to come to her on his terms. Not this time. Not ever again. They made it back to the ranch by mid-afternoon. Clara went straight to the barn, checked the horses, checked the pen, checked the south fence line from a distance with her hand shading her eyes. Nothing disturbed. Nothing moved. The ranch sat in the Texas summer heat exactly as they'd left it, quiet and stubborn and still standing. But quiet didn't mean safe. She knew that now in a way she hadn't known it 2 weeks ago, before any of this started. Quiet was just what things looked like, right before they broke. "He'll come tonight," Ethan said. He was standing beside her, looking at the same fence line. "Or tomorrow morning. He won't wait longer than that." "I know. Patterson's finding buys us legal ground. It doesn't buy us men with guns." "I know that too." She turned from the fence. "What do we have?" He looked at her directly. "2 rifles. Your father's Winchester and my Henry. 40 rounds between them, if I count right." He paused. "The barn has height. The roof of the house has a sight line to the gate and 200 yards down the road." "Tommy," Clara said. Ethan looked at the boy, who was standing at the edge of the yard, listening to everything with the focused attention of someone who understood that the conversation concerned him directly and intended to be useful. "Tommy," Ethan said carefully, "have you fired a rifle before?" "Yes, sir." No hesitation. "My father taught me on a .22. I'm a fair shot at 50 yards. Ethan looked at Clara. "The house roof," she said. "He's small. He can stay flat. Nobody's going to be looking up at the house when the gate's in front of them." Tommy stood up straighter. "I can do it." "I know you can," Clara said. She looked at him steadily. "But Tommy, listen to me. You don't fire unless someone is coming directly at you, or directly at one of us. You understand? You are not a soldier. You are backup. Last resort." "Yes, ma'am." "If something goes wrong, if it goes badly, you get off that roof and you ride north. You ride to Patterson and you tell him what happened. You don't stop." She held his eyes. "That's not cowardice. That's the job I'm giving you. Can you do that job?" Tommy looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I can do both jobs." Clara almost smiled. She turned back to Ethan. "We need to know when they're coming before they're at the gate." "I'll set a line," Ethan said. "Rope across the road 1/2 mile south, tied to a can. Low enough they won't see it in the dark. They trip it, we hear it, we have 3 minutes." "Do it now," Clara said, "while there's light." He went. She went inside and she loaded every round she had and laid the rifles on the table and sat down and wrote a letter. She wrote it to Reverend Alcott. She told him everything that had happened since that morning. The courthouse, Patterson, the finding, Hale's face when he understood what he was looking at. She told him where the deed was and where the letters were and where Patterson's finding was filed. She wrote it careful and complete, the way her father had always written things, like the words were going to outlast the person writing them. She folded it, addressed it, left it on the table where it would be found. Then she sat for a moment in her father's chair at her father's table, and she put her hand flat on the wood, and she said quietly to the empty kitchen, "I'm going to keep it, Papa. Whatever happens tonight, I'm going to keep it." The wood was warm from the afternoon sun coming through the window. She picked up the rifle and went back outside. Ethan came back from the road as the sun went down. He'd set the line. He'd also, she noticed, moved the horses to the east side of the pen, where they were harder to see from the gate and harder to spook. He'd blocked the barn door from the inside with a crossbeam. He'd moved the water trough so it sat against the wall instead of in the open yard, because in a firefight, open ground was nobody's friend. He hadn't been told to do any of it. He'd just done it. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The specific understanding of two people who had been in the same danger long enough that they'd stopped needing to explain things to each other. "You've done this before," she said, not accusing, just noting. "Defended a position?" He checked the Henry's action. "Yes." "How many times?" He thought about it honestly. "Enough to know what matters and what doesn't." "What matters?" "Keeping your head when the other side is losing theirs." He looked up at her. "You're good at that." She didn't deflect it or minimize it the way she might have 2 weeks ago. She just nodded, because it was true, and they were past the point where pretending otherwise served any purpose. "Tommy's on the roof," she said. "I told him last resort only." "Good." He paused. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked at him. "Hale's going to bring Dade," Ethan said. "He needs a local, someone who can say you pulled a weapon first, that he came in good faith, that you were the aggressor." He met her eyes. "Dade will do it. He's already in this too deep to do anything else." Clara absorbed that. Her cousin. The person who had stood over her in the hay and decided she was an obstacle. "Let him come," she said. "Clara, I said let him come." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "I want to look Dade Whitmore in the face when this is over, and I want him to understand exactly what he chose and what it cost him." She looked at Ethan. "I'm not going to shoot my cousin if I don't have to, but I am not afraid of him either." Ethan was quiet. "All right," he said. They took their positions, Ethan in the barn with the height and the sight lines, Clara on the porch with the Winchester and the legal deed in her coat pocket. She'd retrieved it from the Bible before the light went entirely, folded it small, put it where she could pull it out fast. Tommy on the house roof, flat and still, the way she'd shown him, with strict instructions not to move until she'd given the signal, or until he had no choice. The night came down over the Texas plains like a curtain pulled slow. Clara sat on the porch and waited. She thought about her father. She thought about the morning he'd handed her the Winchester for the first time. She'd been 9, and the gun had been almost as tall as she was, and he'd crouched behind her and wrapped his arms around her to show her how to hold it. And he'd said, "This isn't about violence, Clara. This is about never having to beg for your life. There's a difference." She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. The can rattled at 10:30. She heard it clear in the night quiet. A single sharp metallic sound that meant someone had hit the rope and not noticed it. One sound, which meant they hadn't scattered when they heard it, which meant they were confident. 3 minutes. She stood up. "Ethan," she called, low. "I heard it," he said from the barn. "Tommy." Quiet. A small sound from the roof that meant he was awake and ready. She moved to the edge of the porch and stood where she could see the gate and the road beyond it. And she held the Winchester in both hands, and she breathed the way her father had taught her, and she waited. They came out of the dark in a line. 6 riders. She counted them before they reached the gate. 6 shapes moving in formation, taking their time. No urgency because they believed they had all the advantages. She could see the front rider's coat before she could see his face, and she recognized the gray horse before she recognized Hale. He pulled up at the gate. "Miss Whitmore," he called out. His voice was perfectly controlled, the room filling authority, back in place like he'd never lost it. "Come out and let's talk this through like reasonable people." "I'm already out," Clara said. He looked at her on the porch, looked at the rifle. "Put down the gun," he said. "I'll put it down when you put yours down," she said, "which will be right around when Judge Patterson's marshals ride in from the north, which I expect will be sometime before morning." She watched his face. "I sent Reverend Alcott to bring them, about an hour before you arrived." It was a gamble. She hadn't sent Alcott. She hadn't had the chance. But Alcott had everything he needed, and Alcott was not a man who sat on information like this, and she was betting that Hale didn't know that for certain. She watched the calculation move through his face. "You're bluffing," he said. "Am I?" She looked at him steadily. "You want to wait and find out?" One of the riders moved, shifting left, the way Garner's man had done on the road. Then another shifted right. Clara tracked them both and kept her face blank. Dade's voice came from the right side. "There's only 2 of them, Hale, the girl and the drifter." He sounded edgy, not controlled the way Hale was controlled. Dade Whitmore had never been able to manage the specific thing that made dangerous men dangerous, which was patience. "Let's just end this." "Dade," Clara said. Silence from the right. "You look at me," she said. A long pause. Then Dade walked his horse forward until she could see his face. He looked worse than she expected. Not physically, but something behind the eyes. The look of a man who'd committed to a thing and was living with the weight of it and finding it heavier than he'd planned. "You are my family," Clara said. He set his jaw. "Don't. You came to my father's funeral and you shook my hand, and then you went and bought a forgery with the dirt still fresh on his grave." "That land should have come to me," Dade said. His voice cracked on the last word in a way that revealed something. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Something that had been righteousness once and had curdled. "Your daddy never deserved what he had. He was just lucky. I worked as hard as he did, and I got nothing. And he got 40 acres and a—" "He worked for 30 years, Clara said. "I watched him. Every day of my life, I watched him. That wasn't luck. That was his hands and his blood and his life." Her voice was steady, completely steady. "And you were never going to build anything, Dade, because you spent your whole life looking at what other people had, instead of making something of your own." The words landed, and she watched them land. Watched Dade flinch like she'd hit him with something physical. Hale made a small movement with his right hand. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was the signal. Clara saw it. "Ethan!" she shouted. The barn door came open. Everything happened in a compressed, chaotic sequence that later she would remember not as a series of events, but as a single enormous thing. Hale's men pulling their guns. Ethan coming out of the barn with a Henry already up. 2 shots from the left that went wide. A horse screaming. Somebody cursing. Dade pulling his horse back and sideways, and then stopping like he couldn't make himself do the last thing. Clara fired once. She aimed for Hale's horse, not Hale. The horse reared, and Hale went sideways in the saddle and had to grab the horn. And in the 3 seconds he was off balance, Ethan put 2 shots into the ground in front of the grouped riders. Not at them, in front of them. And horses didn't like that. and 2 of the 6 started backing hard. "Hale!" Clara shouted. He got his horse under control,
Looked at her. She had the Winchester leveled at his chest.
"It's over," she said. "Patterson has the finding. Alcott has the letters. Roy Reed has agreed to testify. Garner is at the doctor's office in county seat right now, and when he can talk, he's going to talk." She didn't move the rifle. "Every road out of this is the same road. The only question is how many people get hurt before you admit it." Hale looked at her. His face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. The smooth authority finally, visibly failing. Underneath it was something smaller and meaner and more frightened. "You think a preliminary finding means anything?" he said. But the voice had changed. The certainty was performed now, not real. "I think it means enough," Clara said. From the roof of the house, small, flat, barely visible against the night sky, Tommy Reed's voice came down. Steady. Clearer than Clara had expected from a 12-year-old boy in the dark.
"I can see all 6 of you," Tommy said. "Just so you know." One of Hale's men looked up. Hale looked up. Clara kept her eyes on Hale. "That's Tommy Reed," she said. 12 years old. Orphaned on the North Road this morning by your men." She let that sit. "He's a witness. He has given a signed statement to Judge Patterson's clerk. He is going to stand up in a courtroom and describe exactly what he saw." She paused. "You cannot buy your way out of all of this, Marshal. There are too many people who know." The night was very still. Hale's horse shifted. He brought it back under control with practiced ease, and she could see him doing it, using the familiar motion to buy himself seconds, the way a man grabs for something ordinary when everything else is falling. Then he looked at his men. One by one they looked back at him, and what Clara saw in their faces was not loyalty, but calculation. The specific recalculation of men who had signed on to a winning side and were now looking at the numbers and wondering. Dade spoke first. His voice came out rough and broken. "I'm done," Dade said. Hale turned on him. "Dade, I said I'm done." Dade's voice cracked all the way through this time, and he didn't try to stop it. "I ain't going to prison for your land schemes. I ain't." He looked at Clara, and the look on his face was ugly and ashamed and sorry all at the same time, which was probably the most honest she'd ever seen him. "I'll tell them everything I know." The sound that came from Hale was almost nothing, just a small exhale, the sound of a structure collapsing inward. And then he reached for his gun. Ethan shot first. Not to kill, he was too good a shot for it to have been anything but a deliberate choice. The bullet took Hale's gun hand, and Hale dropped the weapon and grabbed his hand and made a sound that was nothing like the smooth authority he'd walked in with, and his horse spun out, and he stayed on it by instinct alone. Silence. Clara walked off the porch. She walked to Hale's horse, and she looked up at him. This man who had ordered her family's land stolen, who had put her cousins up to leaving her for dead in a barn, who had built a small empire out of other people's losses. And she looked at him the way her father had looked at everything that needed to be looked at clearly and without flinching. "Get down," she said. He got down. "Hands," Ethan said. He put them up. The 2 remaining riders who hadn't fled looked at each other, and then at the ground, and then put their hands up too, because the math had become very simple, and even men with no conscience could do simple math. Clara looked at Dade. He was still on his horse. His face was destroyed, not physically, but the thing behind it, the justification he'd been carrying for 6 months, the story he'd told himself about why he deserved what he'd tried to take. All of it was gone now, and she could see straight through to what was underneath,
which was just a frightened, ordinary man who had made terrible choices and was going to have to live in them. "Get down, Dade," she said, quietly. He got down. "The letters Patterson's marshals will need," she said. "Every detail of the arrangement, every meeting with Hale, the name of the man who forged the deed." She held his eyes. "All of it." "You know I'll hang," he said. "I don't know that," she said. "But I know if you tell the truth, you've got something to stand on. And if you don't, you've got nothing." She looked at him one more time. Her cousin, her blood, the boy she'd grown up running fence lines with. And then she looked away.
"It's the only offer I have." Patterson's marshals came at dawn. 4 of them, riding hard from the north, which meant Alcott had done exactly what she'd known he would do. Had gone to county seat the moment he'd left the ranch yesterday morning, and had stayed there, waiting. Because Reverend Alcott had known Elias Whitmore for 30 years, and knew that his daughter was not going to need prayer half as much as she was going to need legal authority on horseback. They found Victor Hale sitting in the barn with his hand wrapped in a strip of Clara's spare shirt, 2 of his men beside him, Dade Whitmore on the far wall with his face in his hands. Ethan met the marshals at the gate and told them the short version of the long story. And they listened without interrupting, the way men listened when they understood the shape of something before all the details filled in. Clara watched from the porch. Tommy Reed stood beside her. He'd come down from the roof sometime after it was over, and he'd been close to her ever since. Not clinging, just present, the way he'd been in the creek bed. The specific nearness of a person who had decided you were safe and was not making any apologies about it. One of the marshals came to the porch. "Miss Whitmore," he said. He touched his hat. "Judge Patterson sends his regards. He says to tell you the preliminary finding has been upgraded to a formal order. The deed is invalidated. This land is yours, legally and on record, as of yesterday morning." Clara looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He went back to the yard. She stood on the porch of her father's house, with the Texas morning coming up gold and enormous around her, and she let herself feel it. All of it. The whole weight of everything she'd been holding at arm's length for 2 weeks, since the morning she'd woken up in the hay, with her face split open, and 1 bullet in a rifle, and 3 cousins who thought she was dead. She let herself feel the grief. Her father. The way he'd looked at this land like it was alive. The way he'd never once, not once in her 17 years, made her feel like being his daughter and not his son was a disappointment or a limitation. She let herself feel the fear she'd managed instead of felt. All those nights on the porch with a rifle. All those mornings waking up not certain it was going to hold. And then she let it go. Ethan came and stood beside her. Not close, beside. He looked at the yard, the barn, the fence line, the creek south. He looked at all of it the way she'd seen him look at things he was deciding about, and she waited to see what he decided. "You're going to stay," she said, not a question. He was quiet for a moment. "If you'll have me," he said. She looked at him. "You said you were looking for a place to stop running." "I was." "Well?" She looked at the fence line. "The south pasture needs finishing. The barn roof has a hole in the southeast corner. And the cattle need moving to the east pen before the grass in the west pen goes completely bare." She paused. "That's about 3 weeks of work if you reckon it." "I reckon it's more like 4, Ethan said. "Then you'd better start tomorrow." He looked at her with that expression she'd spent 2 weeks learning to read and had finally gotten right. Not exactly a smile, but the thing that lived just behind where a smile would be. The thing that meant he was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where he meant to be. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Tommy Reed looked up at both of them. He'd been following the conversation with the careful attention of a boy who was doing his own calculation, adding things up, checking his numbers, deciding what the answer was. "So we're staying," he said. Clara looked down at him. "You got somewhere better to be?" she said. He thought about it seriously, the way 12-year-olds thought about things when they were trying to be dignified. "No, ma'am," he said. "I reckon I don't." "Then you stay," she said simply. "You work, you eat, you sleep with a roof over your head. That's the arrangement." "And school," Ethan said, without looking at either of them. "Alcott runs a school on Saturdays." Tommy looked at him. "You want me to go to school?" "I want you to go to school," Clara said. "So did that." Tommy considered. Then he nodded once, the way people nodded when they'd gotten more than they expected and weren't quite sure how to carry it yet. 2 months later, Reverend Alcott came to the ranch with a piece of news and a question. The news was that Victor Hale had been formally charged with 4 counts of fraudulent land acquisition, 2 counts of conspiracy, and 1 count of attempted murder. Dade Whitmore had testified in full and been given a reduced sentence in exchange. The San Antonio forger had been identified and arrested. Judge Connolly had resigned. The question was about the ranch. "People have been asking what to call it," Alcott said. He was sitting at Clara's table with a cup of coffee he'd been kind enough not to complain about. "The deed lists it as Whitmore Ranch still, but people in town—" He paused. "They've taken to calling it something else." "What do they call it?" Clara said. Alcott looked at her steadily. "Iron Widow Ranch," he said. The kitchen was quiet. "I'm not a widow," Clara said. "No," Alcott agreed, "but they're not calling you that because of a husband." He held her eyes. "They're calling you that because of what you wouldn't break under." Clara looked at the table. She thought about the name, what it meant, what it would mean to people in 3 counties who had heard the story. And the story had traveled, the way stories did in Texas in 1876, carried on horseback from town to town, added to and shaped by every pair of hands that passed it along. A girl left for dead in her father's barn, a forged deed and a badge, and a man who thought legal instruments made him untouchable, and a 17-year-old who got back up. She thought about her father, what he would say. She could almost hear him, the specific tone he'd used when something surprised him in a way he found worth respecting. "Well," he would have said, "sounds like you made yourself a name, Clara." "Iron Widow Ranch," she said slowly. Ethan looked at her from across the table. Tommy looked at her from his chair by the window, where he'd been working on the arithmetic Alcott had assigned him on Saturday. She looked at Ethan. He lifted his chin slightly, waiting. "All right," Clara Whitmore said. "Iron Widow Ranch." She said it the way her father had said things, flat and certain and without any room for argument. And then she picked up her coffee cup and looked out the window at her land, her 40 acres of dry, stubborn Texas earth. And she felt something settle into place inside her that had been loose and rattling for as long as she could remember. Not happiness exactly. Not the big, simple happiness of stories. Something more solid than that. The knowledge that you had been tested down to nothing and had found something at the bottom that held. Outside, the summer grass moved in the south wind. The cattle were in the east pen. The south fence was finished. The barn roof was patched. The well was clean. Everything her father had built was still standing. And so was she.